Chapter 20. The Letters. Mattie groaned miserably and rolled over in her bunk. The violent up and down and back and forth motion nauseated her to the very pit of her stomach. It was a mystery to her why she and Ellen had thought it would be fun to go home by ship. They had taken the last ship to sail before winter out of Buffalo, New York, and were sailing through Lake Erie, bound for Cleveland, Ohio. It was a miserable journey. The cabins were small and stuffy, and now when Mattie needed a chamber pot, it was too dark to find it. She sat up and bumped her head on Ellen's bunk overhead. Suddenly, the supper they had enjoyed in the dining hall only hours earlier threatened to come up. She staggered to her feet and fell against the wall, accidentally kicking the porcelain chamber pot and sending it skittering across the floor. Grabbing it, she retched and vomited. How she wished Ellen would wake up so she could help. The ship pitched and rolled, and Mattie fell back into her bunk. She lay still until she needed to vomit again. She was sweating profusely and gasping for fresh air. Lightning flashed through the tiny porthole and for brief seconds lit their cabin. Suddenly, Ellen sat up and half fell from her bunk. "Where's the pot?" she mumbled. A violent roll of the ship sent her sprawling across the floor and crashing against the metal door beside Mattie. "Over here," Mattie said, and weakly reached for it. It was no longer where she had left it, and she hardly had the strength to get up to find it. She waited for a flash of lightning. "Hurry up," Ellen gasped. Mattie felt around with her foot, and when she touched it, quickly pushed it toward Ellen. But because it was pitch dark, Ellen could not see it. "It's there by your foot," Mattie mumbled and flopped weakly back onto her bed. Ellen grabbed it and vomited. Then she lay on the floor, waiting for her strength to return. Never had either one felt so very sick. Sick to the core of their beings, and to make matters worse, they knew they were doomed to stay on the ship until noon the next day. The ship tossed and pitched, first one direction, then the opposite, up and down and back and forth until Mattie wondered if they were going backward instead of forward. The chamber pot was spilling dreadfully, and Ella needed to get off the floor. She grabbed the side of Mattie's bed and attempted to pull herself up, but the tossing of the ship made it impossible. Mattie held her arms to keep her from slipping, and together they managed to get her into a sitting position. Her gown was soaked. "Take off your gown and wrap up in this sheet," Mattie mumbled. She pulled the sheet off her bed and helped Ellen get undressed and wrapped in it. Then they both flopped onto Mattie's tiny bunk and lay still, too weak to move. When would this nightmare end? Would it soon be daylight? Would the waters be smoother when they got closer to land? Would their thirst for adventure be satisfied now? Phew! Mattie was too dizzy to think. Thunder boomed outside. The ship zoomed up a mountain of water, then fell hard into a pit on the other side. Up another mountain and into a deeper pit. More thunder, more pitching back and forth, more vomiting, more changing of sheets, more exhaustion. With time, the peaks and valleys lessened, and the thunder grew distant. Mattie fell asleep, and when she awoke, Ellen was back in her own bunk, and the sea was nearly calm. Rolling over, she fell soundly asleep. When she woke up again, sunlight was streaming through the tiny window, and Ellen was dressed and cleaning the floor. "What a night!" Mattie exclaimed, sitting up in bed. The sheets were pulled off the mattress and twisted around her. Everything was in disarray. "It was awful," Ellen agreed. "We'll never do this again, will we?" "Absolutely not. If I ever get off this boat, I'll never get on another one. Never, Ellen declared. Mattie chuckled and tried to stand, but her legs shook. Let's hurry up and go on the deck. I can't stand it down here a minute longer, Ellen said. She grabbed Mattie's suitcase and helped her get dressed. Then she tried combing her hair for her. Ah, I can do that. Mattie took the comb and began hurriedly combing out the snarls. When she was finally ready to go outdoors, Ellen nearly pushed her up the steps. She was in a hurry, and Mattie didn't blame her. Other passengers were walking on the deck. Many of them clung weakly to the railing, their faces drawn and pale. They apparently had suffered through the night, too. Mattie and Ellen drank in the fresh air and sunshine. Now they wanted to reach land as swiftly as possible. Far, far away on the horizon was a thin sliver of land. But hour after hour, it failed to get closer. They rested on deck chairs, waiting impatiently for their journey to end. The sun rose higher and higher, providing cozy warmth if they were out of the wind. They laid back in their chairs, eyes closed. Whether or not they slept, they didn't know. At last they heard the engines slow and they looked up. The sliver of land was approaching fast, and tall buildings could easily be seen. Could it be that their miserable journey was nearly at an end? Quickly, they went down to their bunks to get their bags and suitcases and carried them up to the deck. They didn't want even 1 minute of delay in getting on solid ground. When they finally were off the ship, off the dock, and through the terminal, they walked to the Cleveland bus station several blocks away and bought tickets for Plain City. Plain City! It would be so good to be home. Giddle picked them up at the bus station in Plain City and was full of questions about New York, the children's home, the Mennonite young people, and the ship ride. But the girls were almost too tired to answer. When he asked how they liked the ship, both of them responded in no uncertain terms, "Please, please don't mention it." It would be a long time before they would be in a mood to tell of their wonderful ship ride. It was good to be home. Oh, it was so good to be home. Mother was a picture of health and seemingly enjoying every minute at Plain City. For so many years she had had little contact with her sisters and Dotties, and now it was truly a blessing to be neighbors. Tobe and Nettie had moved 2 miles to the east of them. They now had 2 more children, Katie and a new baby, Levi. The older children often ran through the fields to borrow a cup of sugar, bring a letter to Mother, or to help with her gardening. One day, John and Chris appeared at the front gate with a letter. They handed it to Mattie. "Is it for me?" she asked in surprise. "No, but Mother thought you would want to read it too. Uncle Sam sent it to Mom." Mattie caught her breath. What could it be about? Was he married to someone else? Was that what Nettie thought she should know? Hiding both her fear and excitement, she invited them inside for cookies and lemonade. Mother bustled out of her bedroom where she had been sewing a vest for Chris. "You're just the person I want to see," she told him. "When you're finished filling up that little belly, I want you to try on this vest." Then she turned to Mattie and asked what they had brought. "It's a letter from Sam, and Nettie thought I would want to read it. I wonder why." She cautiously slid the letter from the envelope and scanned over its contents. Seeing nothing to cause alarm, she began reading and learned that he was planning to come to Plain City for Christmas. He didn't mention another girl or anything, so maybe he was still single and interested in her. Hope rose within her. Sam was coming, and he wasn't married, and he apparently didn't have a girlfriend. "What does it say?" Mother asked. "He's coming for Christmas," Mattie answered. "Yeah, we knew that, but Mom told us not to tell you," John said importantly, grinning from ear to ear. "That's right, Aunt Mattie. Mom told us not to tell, and we didn't, did we?" Chris nodded. You sure didn't. You kept that secret like big boys. She patted him on the head. Then her eyes met Mother's and they smiled. Mother understood perfectly. Lydia was working away, so Mattie decided to get a job too. Edna and John Miller needed help, and Mattie began working there. Time passed slowly since she knew that Sam would be coming for Christmas. But when he arrived, Mattie suddenly felt shy and apprehensive. He hadn't come to see her. Maybe he wasn't interested in her at all. The first Sunday Sam was there, she saw him walk across the porch and enter Benjamin Yoder's home. This was where they were having church services, and she was just driving into the lane when he entered the house. He was more handsome than she remembered, and her heart began hammering wildly. Mattie entered the house through the kitchen and slipped quietly into place across the room from Sam. He looked up, and their eyes met. He smiled, and she quickly looked away. He smiled, she thought. He smiled at me. Why didn't I smile back? The next time their eyes met, she smiled in return. That evening after the singing, Sam told Ellen to ask Mattie if she wanted to have a date. Ellen hurried to the bedroom where Mattie was putting on her shawl and bonnet. Sam told me to ask you if you wanted to have a date tonight, she whispered excitedly. Shh! Everybody will hear you, Mattie reprimanded her. Are you sure you're not making that up? I'm sure. He really likes you, Mattie. I can tell. I bet he just lost your address like I always told you he did. And here you've been so stubborn all this time and insisted that he has another girl. Now go out there and let him take you home. Ellen's eyes were shining. Okay, she giggled, picking up her bonnet and setting it on her head. That night, Mattie and Sam talked and talked and talked, well past midnight. His silence had indeed been a mistake, one that neither of them could have avoided. I didn't know what had happened, he told her. I got that box of stationery from you at Christmas, but you said you didn't know where you were going after that, and I never heard from you again. I figured you had found another boy you liked better and forgot about me. I wrote a letter from Hilty's in Indiana. Didn't you get it? I had given you my address there. No, I never got a letter from Indiana, he answered. I had written something in that letter I sent from Hilty's that I figured you didn't like, and so you decided to drop me. I just knew that you had another girl and maybe had even married. Oh, no, Mattie, I never got that letter. What did you write that you thought I wouldn't like? Oh, she was embarrassed to tell him. I had written how much I miss you, and that I hoped you missed me too, and some other stuff. It sounded silly now. He threw back his head and laughed until Mattie was afraid he'd wake Father. Well, 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 you didn't have to worry. I wouldn't have quit writing you because of that. He looked into her eyes affectionately. That night, before he left, he asked for a date the next Sunday night. They would make up for lost time. It had been exactly a year since they had heard from each other, and a long year it had been. Winter passed into spring, and spring into summer. Letters passed between Sam and Mattie, and all was right with the world again. She continued working for Edna and John and going home for the weekends. One day she received a letter from Sam stating that he was planning to come in June and stay for a few weeks. How her heart sang, and her work no longer seemed as work. This time he came by bus, and she met him at the depot alone. It was a happy buggy ride home. I thought I might stay at your house this time if you don't mind, he said. Oh, that will be just all right, she answered. Tobes are so crowded, and I thought that maybe Giddle won't mind too much if I barge in on him for a while. I'd like to work with your dad, too, if he needs help. She smiled, pleased to hear that he enjoyed her family. Father would like that very much, I'm sure. It was a busy time with gardening and canning, so Mattie did not ask to have time off from her job as she would have liked while Sam was there. They would see each other on the weekends. Wednesday evening, Mattie was surprised to see Sam drive in John's lane in Father's buggy. She hurried out to the gate to meet him. To have him visit in the middle of the week was unusual, and she wondered if something had gone wrong at home. "Hi," she greeted him. "Is something wrong?" "Yeah," he answered soberly. Her heart quickened in fear. "What's the matter?" "I miss you," he smiled mischievously. "Oh, you," she laughed. "You scared me." He chuckled good-naturedly and asked if she wanted to go for a ride. "Of course," she cried. "Just wait a few minutes while I get the kitchen clean." She rushed indoors and hurriedly put the dry dishes back in their places. Then she ran to her bedroom to change into a clean dress. When she stepped into the buggy, he commented on her fast movements. "Nobody can work around you, I see." "Especially not when someone is waiting to take me for a ride," she responded happily. They rode throughout the countryside, talking of the happenings at home, the work at John's, and finally of their inner feelings. More and more they bared their hearts to each other. Every Wednesday evening after that, he came for a drive through the country. They just drove, talking and laughing, and then he would take her back to John's. On Sunday nights, they had real dates, with him taking her to the singings and back home again. The night before he was scheduled to leave for Kansas again, he began talking about their relationship and what it meant to him. "I don't want to leave, Mattie, but Dad needs me," he began. "I've never enjoyed another 3 weeks in my life as much as I have these past 3. Your family is quite different from mine, you know." She nodded. Life wasn't the same in the Knepp home since Katie had died. Nobody can replace one's mother, and Mattie realized it was painful for Sam. "I'm going to miss you, Mattie. Thanks so much for all you've done for me." "Oh, Sam, I didn't do that much. If I did, it didn't seem like much because it was for you." "I wish I wouldn't have to leave." He became more intense. "I'd like to just stay here always." Then, as though it were an afterthought, he added, "Maybe I can someday." "Well, maybe so." Mattie looked at her hands, not knowing exactly how to answer him. He took a deep breath and looked at the darkened window, then stood. She arose too, and their eyes met. Tears glistened in his, and Mattie looked away. How tender he was, and she knew that he experienced much pain in his heart. Sometimes it just had to come out. She moved to his side and said, "I'll be thinking about you." "Thank you, Mattie. You mean a lot to me, and I don't want anything to come between us. You don't know what it did to me when I didn't hear from you anymore last year. It was like something died inside of me. I had had such high hopes for us, and it seemed like they were all over." "It was the same for me, Sam. I had a date with another boy in New York, but it just wasn't the same." They walked through the living room to the bedroom door. He stood with his hand on the doorknob to Gittle's room. "We won't let that happen again, will we? We know each other better now," he smiled. "Now I can tell you how I feel, can't I?" she asked playfully. "Of course. I won't mind," he laughed. "Well, we need to get to bed. Good night, Mattie." "Good night, Sam." Reluctantly they parted, knowing in their hearts that they were secure in each other's love. End of chapter 20.